now say Labour ought to do.
Well, no, that's not right. The previous request that came from Oldham Council was by a small number of local councils. The request that has come to this new Labour government is a different one. This is from the council itself.
Did the Conservatives set up an inquiry into what was happening in Oldham when you were in government?
No, because there was not a request. No, Nick, there was. We must make this clear. There was not a request from the council itself. The council have now asked that they do not have the bandwidth, the capacity to do this inquiry, and have asked the Home Office to organise one for them. I think it is very surprising. I can't in fact think of any good reason why the Home Office, armed with that request from the council itself, would not provide that support.
Well, we've just heard the good reason from Professor Alexis Jay, who set up and chaired the independent inquiry into child abuse. What she says is that another inquiry would be a distraction from implementing the changes that were recommended while the Conservatives were in power. So I ask another question. Why did the Conservatives in power not implement the findings of the independent inquiry into child abuse?
Well, firstly, we have the two central recommendations of the review were being taken forward by the last Conservative government.
Taken forward?
They are
not
the two things
implemented,
which
Mr. General. They are being implemented by this government.
Well, they do. Well, they are the things we were taking forward. We drafted the legislation. It was in the criminal justice bill that was before Parliament that fell away as a result of the general election.
You've been in government for 14 years. The first report
the review
of
only
abuse
came
were
out
in
in
2022.
2022.
That was your decision about when to set up an inquiry. The first reports of mass grooming and arrests were in 2010. The first inquiry into Rotherham Council was in 2014. The report in Greater Manchester to a police cover-up was in 2020. So if there was a delay setting up an inquiry into child abuse, would you like to accept that was a delay by Conservative ministers in a Conservative government?
No, look, you asked me, were we taking forward the recommendations of the J review that was reported in 2022? The answer is yes. The two central recommendations were being legislated for by Parliament under the last Conservative government. We also created the Grooming Gangs Task Force, another important element of that. But I think that this situation is moving forward. If you look at the J review, they only looked at 6 towns. In fact, they weren't even places where there was necessarily suspicion of grooming gang activity. We now know that this may be happening in up to 50 places across our country. That is why we need to have this full national inquiry.
Yesterday,
let
me just deal with your detail.
And then make one point.
Okay. Go on.
Yesterday, the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, was asked by the Member of Parliament for Keighley, could she name the number of victims of this scandal in Keighley or Bradford district? She couldn't. She didn't know the information. That's not right. That fact is shameful. We need to have this information.
It's not right, which is why the Home Secretary yesterday announced that one of the changes that this government is making, your government did not make, is the data would be published. But I put your
that was being taken forward by the last Conservative government.
The
two central things that the Home Secretary announced yesterday were things that are already in train by the last Conservative government. Let's just be clear.
Okay, let's move on to an important point you just made, which is that the J review, just to remind me, the independent inquiry into child abuse, only looked at 6 towns. She specifically, in detail, says that that is wrong. What she says is that the job of that inquiry was to look at 6 towns where there hadn't been allegations, to see whether they had the right approach to data collection, the right approach to revealing the information, and that all underlay the recommendations that she made. So far from ignoring suggestions of abuse in other towns and cities, she says she has the recommendations that are required to deal with that, and the job of politicians is to get on and do what your government failed to do, implement them.
No one is saying that Alexis Jay ignored what was happening. What I'm saying is we now know so much more. Telford, Oldham, Stockport, Sheffield, St Helens, Preston, Peterborough, Blackburn, Bradford, Keighley, Rochdale, Rotherham, Hull, Huddersfield, Bristol, Banbury, High Wycombe, Aylesbury. We know that this was happening in towns and cities the length and breadth of our country.
Well, if you know, why not simply implement the changes required to stop
places? They deserve justice. They deserve answers. We need to make sure that not a single vulnerable young girl
months
sure
or
that we have
years ensure justice, Mr. General? Will not prosecutions ensure
I want to
justice?
do both.
Will not a new law ensure
I
justice?
want to
Will
do
not
both.
better data collection ensure justice?
Nick, I have been arguing for some time that we should have, for example, full life sentences for the perpetrators. I've been saying that if they're foreign nationals, they should be deported from our country. No ifs, no buts. That the cowardly public officials and councillors who covered this up
Did you
should
raise
be
it when you were a Home
prosecuted.
Office Minister?
Look, I wrote about this last year.
Did you raise it when you were a Home Office
Well,
Minister?
when I was Home Office Minister with Suella Braverman, we did take forward.
Did
issues.
you
In
raise
fact,
it when you were a Home Office Minister, Mr. General?
Well, I did discuss this with the Home Secretary, but it wasn't my portfolio. I did discuss it.
Did
with
you
the
raise it
Home
in the House
Secretary.
of Commons?
Nick, I wrote about this last year, and I was criticised for it.
Yes, I've
I
checked
went- I
Hansard
went-
today, and it's not a perfect test.
I went
when you
on the
put in the
media-
name Robert Jenrick, grooming, no mention.
I
Grooming
wrote- I
gang,
wrote about
no
this, Nick.
mention.
Nick, I wrote
Rotherham,
about this last
no
year.
mention.
I
Oldham,
wrote
no
about this,
mention.
Nick, last year,
Rochdale,
and
no
was
mention.
criticised by the
Child
media.
sexual abuse, no mention, Mr. Jenrick. Child rape, no mention. You have not raised, or have you? Please correct me if my search is wrong. The issue of mass gang rape and child sex abuse that you are so energised about. You have no evidence you raised it as a minister, and no evidence that you've raised it in the House of Commons.
Nick, I wrote about this last year and was criticised by the media for doing so. Suella Braverman was heavily criticised by the media for raising this and by making the link to the cultural and immigration elements that lie
Well, let's turn to
behind
that,
it.
because
But
it's
this
an
is not
important point.
about us. This
No,
is
no.
about the victims,
Sure.
and it is right to hold a full national inquiry.
Let's turn
That
to
is
what
the
you
issue
said
we
about
should be addressing.
culture, which you have just said. Just to remind people who may not have read it, and then give you the chance to explore what you meant by this. You wrote an article in which you said there was a link between what we're talking about and the need, in your words, to end mass migration. You went on, not all cultures are equal. Importing hundreds of thousands of people from alien cultures who possess what you call medieval attitudes towards women brought us here. Which cultures are you talking about?
That millions of people, Nick, have come into the UK in recent times. Some of these people hold backwards attitudes to women. We know from the Jay report that British Pakistani men were overrepresented as members of these rape gangs. And we know that many selected their victims because they were white and viewed them as worthless as a result. It is important that we're honest about that. And I'm
being
not going
honest,
to
do you want to
sanitize
stop
or disguise
migration
my
of
language.
Pakistanis?
Look, I think that it is very difficult to successfully integrate the very large numbers of people who we have had coming into our country in recent years. We should be open about that.
Are you saying that
That's why I
people from
want to
Pakistan
bring the
have a
numbers
medieval
down.
culture?
I think some people who come from that country do. I'm not saying everybody.
Does
I'm saying that
Sajid
some
Javid's
people-
family
I'm saying some
come with a
people. I'm
medieval
saying some
culture to
people-
this country?
Nick, I'm saying some people do.
Does Sadiq Khan's family?
Look, I'm saying
have a
some
medieval?
people do.
Well,
Nick.
how are you going to
And that-
identify
and-
those that you think are acceptable and those are not?
Are you disputing, Nick, the evidence outlined by the reports that you have cited and the testimonies of the victims, in fact the testimonies of the perpetrators themselves, that many cases were Pakistani men, some born in this country, some who come
I'm asking
into
you
this country
what you would
more
do as a
recently.
result of it. Would you stop immigration from those countries?
I've always said that it's the point made by Kemi Badenoch, the leader of my party, that not all cultures are equal. We should be very careful about who is coming into this country and the scale of immigration.
So why
Because
did the
it's
numbers of
immensely
Pakistanis coming into this
challenging. It is
country
immensely challenging to
increase when you were in the Home
integrate.
Office and increase since Brexit under the Conservative government?
Firstly, when I was in the Home Office, we made the biggest reduction in net migration in living memory.
Just
We
answer
put
the
in-
question if you
well,
want,
I am
Mr.
answering
General.
the question.
Did
We put in place
immigration from the
measures.
culture you say is alien, your words not mine, did it go up or down when you were in the Home Office and the Conservatives were in government?
I've been very clear in the past that the numbers of people coming to
It
this
went up.
country rose significantly, too much, and that is wrong.
So we need to
We
be
made
clear.
mistakes
Are
when we
you
were in
saying
office.
that certain countries have, in your words, alien cultures with medieval attitudes, and the British immigration policy should now be remade to stop people coming from those countries?
I think that we have to be very careful about who is coming to this country, the scale and pace of that immigration,
What's
so
the
that we
answer
can
to the
have
question?
So that we can have a much more successful integration policy
The
than we
answer
have
to the
today.
question?
Nobody, frankly, say that integration is working well in this country when you see evidence like
What
this?
is the answer to the question about whether Conservatives want to see a new immigration policy which specifically say that some cultures are more acceptable than others?
We have said that we want to reduce the number of people coming in to this country, and we want to have a legally binding cap set by Parliament. We're going to determine the level at which, the threshold at which that is set in the months or years ahead. But it's by having it at a much lower level that we can successfully integrate people into this country.
Understood. Now, the reason I'm pushing you hard is because you've got a record of the government to defend, and as you've been clear, you feel very strongly about this now, but didn't always feel quite so strongly about it at first.
I've always felt strongly about it.
Well, there are people who note that the Conservatives only called for this inquiry after Elon Musk called for it and after
It has
reform
absolutely
UK.
nothing to do with Elon Musk, Nick.
Well, what first attracted a man ambitious to be leader of his party in his country to the billionaire social media tycoon Elon Musk call for an inquiry?
This issue, Nick, this is nothing to you. I think very wisely opened this interview by saying this is not about Elon Musk. This is about the young girls, the victims. Let's focus on them.
I'm asking about your
not on
rhetoric.
tweets. Well, I haven't mentioned Elon Musk. You're the one who's asking me.
No, I'm asking about your
You're the one who's
rhetoric,
asking
which
me about
some
what
people have warned,
started,
including
what started this debate.
chair of the independent inquiry.
But they say-
She's made a warning about the rhetoric. The man who was head of counter-terrorism, former Metropolitan Police Commander Neil Basu, has made a warning about the rhetoric being used in this debate. The former Conservative number 10 advisor on race has made a warning about rhetoric on this debate. I'm asking you whether you think you have a need, while keen to exploit the government's difficulties, to be wary of your words.
This is about young girls being systematically raped for decades, and you're asking me about disguising my language so as not to offend people. I'm not going to tiptoe around this issue. That is what got us into this mess in the first place. As Alexis J has said powerfully, it was people who were fearful of being accused of racism, who were fearful of political correctness. It was as a result of that charge that people hid this, that led to cowardice, that led to young girls being raped and tortured. We've got to get away with this.
So
Get
just to
away
be
from
clear,
this
Mr.
debate.
General, because I think you are being clear about this, but I want to give you the opportunity to react directly. The former Conservative advisor on race issues, a man called Samuel Kasumi, said that some of his words, your words, may result, and I quote, in some people maybe even dying. He has the potential to incite hatred in ways that I have never seen. Does that quote make you pause for 1 second?
That's complete nonsense. Look, MPs have been killed in this country in recent times by a jihadist and by a neo-Nazi. They were killed because of the views of those individuals, not of what anything an MP has said. We have to fight extremism in this country wherever we find it, and you fight that by standing up to the extremists. You don't fight it by shying away, by turning a blind eye, by looking the other way. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to tiptoe around this issue. Millions of people in our country are listening to your program this morning, and they are appalled by what is happening to young girls, and they are shocked that there might be girls in that situation today. We have to stop this, and we don't stop this by shying away from saying difficult things and saying language clearly and bluntly when it's necessary.
Robert Jenrick, Shadow Secretary of State for Justice, joining us from Westminster. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Listening to that, our political editor, Chris Mason. It's a lively debate, this one, Chris, isn't it?
It certainly is. It certainly is. And look, we should be clear, to what extent can figures like Elon Musk create the weather in British politics? Let's be clear, obviously, that is exactly what he has managed to do, and it provokes a wider argument about who are the torchbearers, the lodestars, if you like, of the right in politics in creating political argument. But the backdrop of Elon Musk's slurry as his critics see it, of gratuitous hyperbole, falsehood devoid of subtlety and nuance in some instances, is this. Yes, there's been the inquiries at a local level, yes, at a national one, yes, you were talking to Professor Alexis J. But there is also undeniably a perception, rightly or wrongly, that somehow collectively as a society we have failed to comprehend, account for, do justice to the scale of the depravity and yes the breadth of failure at so many institutional levels replicated in so many towns. And it is into that gap that Robert Jenrick, that Elon Musk, that Kemi Badenoch, that Nigel Farage and others are stepping.
It is, Chris, and it was interesting that Professor Alexis J said that she did not think that these measures would have been implemented at this speed.
Yeah.
Had it not been for this row.
Quite, and again back to the power of not just Elon Musk, but Elon Musk no doubt has transformed the volume of this conversation, ensuring that the government was confronted with a reality it couldn't sidestep, which was firstly that the Prime Minister had to address head-on some of the language and claims of Elon Musk, and then secondly, at a practical policy level, we saw the Home Secretary in the Commons last night setting out those plans. Would those plans likely have come at some point? Yes. Does it seem reasonable to say that they were fast-forwarded, as the Professor was acknowledging by events? Well, yes.
It certainly does. Interview with Professor J was on at 7:30 on today. If you're clever enough to know how to find it on BBC Sounds, but we will put it up on BBC Sounds as a podcast. Both that interview and the interview with Robert Jenrick. And just to repeat, we would of course have loved to have talked to the Home Secretary this morning. No Home Office.
And that's my journey into work this morning.